All right, everyone. Newsom trolls, Trump jelly rolls, and the National Guard goes for some strolls. Welcome to Talk Show. First and foremost, let's get into the main news story of the eve. It's the news of the past 2 weeks, and it is not being reported on enough. So we're going to start there. First of all, Gaza is officially in a famine. Now, I'm recording this on August 31st, 2025. It has been classified as a famine for almost 2 weeks now. So, Associated Press reports that aid groups are basically attributing the famine to Israeli restrictions on food entry, which naturally Israel denies. And there are further threats of military action unless Hamas disarms and releases hostages. So, Reuters, and AP have jointly demanded answers from the Israel authorities after airstrikes killed 5 journalists at a Gaza hospital. So let's pause there for a second. If you're not hearing about these things, there's a reason for that, right? Traditional media, traditional news outlets are sort of failing Americans at the moment. So it's up to you to seek out sources that are going to call out things like this that are happening. Here's what is not being reported on enough, in my opinion. I'm seeing some folks talk about this, but it's just not in the everyday communique, as some might say. So, reason number 1, unprecedented journalist fatalities. So, I don't think people really get this. They are killing journalists left and right. Not like a couple, not like whoopsie-doo collateral. No, we're talking like 200 journalists in the past 2 years. Coming up on October 2025, it will have been 2 years since some of the first ones started happening. So this includes deaths in a couple of different places. The Nasser Hospital, as well as when Al Jazeera correspondent Anas al-Sharif and 4 colleagues were in a premeditated assassination, according to media watchdogs. That's pretty scary. Unprecedented journalist fatalities. I don't know the last time I heard that. I don't know that I've ever heard that in the news before. I am not really hearing it in the news right now. So this is all terrible. The other piece of this, so number 2, is the double tap strikes and unsafe facilities. I had to dig in a little bit to kind of find information about this to sort of understand. And as I read more, oh my gosh, I don't think anything has made me want to throw out elbows more in recent days. Israel basically has a pattern of double strikes. Okay, so for lay folks out there, what this means is that they attack once, and then they attack again as medics and journalists arrive. Does that click for any of you? So they're attacking again as medics, journalists, and support people come in. So the Nasser Hospital was an example of this. Reuters also reports that many of the attacks have struck known press positions. Okay, I'm not saying it's intentional, but it sure looks that way when a known press position is struck with fire. Those first 2, probably bad enough, but then lucky number 3, the evil regime triple threat, smear. And we're not talking pap smear. I'm not talking about schmear on your bagel. We're talking smearing of journalists. So what does that mean? Well, the authorities don't like you. They just group you in with Hamas. So al-Sharif, who I mentioned before, was an example of this. Basically, he was accused posthumously by the IDF, the Israel Defense Force. So that's right. So basically, they killed this guy, and afterwards somebody was like, why did you kill this guy? And they were like, oh, yeah, he was Hamas. You know. MS-13. Right. What could you do? This all kind of escalates into a new tier of concern that, again, you know, we're seeing freedom of press and a lot of the basic rights that we expect erode today. So what does it mean for press freedom? Like, what does this stuff that's happening thousands of miles away mean for an American like me, who's just a sucker and watches the news and doesn't know what to do? Well, I'm doing that a lot. Well, here's the thing. Americans are we're very spoiled by freedom of press. So that means there's many voices, typically, across the political socioeconomic spectra. And yes, I said spectra, not spectrum, because there's two of them, and the plural of a neuter gender noun in Latin is pluralized with an A. You didn't think I'd remember that, did you, Dr. Bork? He's dead. Requiescat in pace. Granddad Latin. Okay, Latin sass aside, the freedom of the press is incredibly important, and there are a few main concerns, shall we say. I'm trying not to make this whole video about lists, but the first thing that's immediately apparent, I hope it's immediately apparent, is the silencing of truth, the undermining of accountability. With the number of journalists that have been killed, harassed, discredited, etc., the narrative coming from Gaza is manicured, to say the least. It is heavily constrained. So the world really is not seeing how badly the shit's hitting the fan. There is an intentional prevention of independent documentation of this humanitarian crisis. Yes, that's bad. Stop laughing. Barriers to international reporting. Another thing that is a part of this, foreign reporters basically are largely banned from Gaza. I didn't know this. So leaving frontline coverage basically up to local journalists who are operating under extreme risk and with little to no external oversight. So, like, these folks are in the heat and no one is watching their back. And that brings me to this other point where the sort of lack of accountability, there's just constant concern that the investigations into these killings are ineffective or frankly non-existent. So 88% of the past probes into alleged war crimes have reportedly ended without resolution. So if you're wondering why war correspondents in Gaza aren't playing hide and seek anymore, that's because the truth is both impossible to find, and when you do find it, someone just shoots you in the face. Okay, I get pretty passionate about stuff. You may have noticed that I heat up, get a little excited talking about this whole Gaza situation. The video and the media coming out of there, whatever you do see is frankly horrifying. If you're on Fox News exclusively, you're just basically not seeing the true narrative. You're just not seeing any of it. They don't want you to see it, right? I think it's important for us to also turn inward at times like this, right? We obviously have things to be dealt with in the international scene, on the international scene. But America is also dealing with some crazy shit on the home turf, right? We can't deny that. So if you miss the deployment of the National Guard to D.C., it is time to stop living under a rock, especially because at any moment in time, you could be tied to that rock for no legitimate reason, and the rock becomes an ankle weight in a concentration camp. If you haven't been paying attention to the D.C. Guard situation, the troops are now armed. Okay, I sort of didn't realize that troops would be deployed unarmed. That's on me for not knowing this. But apparently, on home turf, there can be deployments, mobilizations without arming the troops. At least with firearms. I'm sure there are layers of this. So what really chaps my caboose on this whole National Guard situation is the blatantly false narrative. Crime is down in D.C. All the blue states that Trump has said will be like next are nowhere near as violent and dangerous as red state cities. Like, we can look at MAGA Johnson's home districts, so places like Red River Parish, Coushatta, I might be saying that wrong, Baton Rouge, even New Orleans. These places all have incredibly high crime rates compared to the national average. So good old New Orleans, which I can't do the cool way that they say it, but New Orleans has like a murder rate of 31 per 100,000. And that's double. It's slightly less, but it's close to double the rate of homicide in D.C. That's crazy. So, like, they love to call D.C. dangerous, but, like, Louisiana and Mississippi murder rates are double. Honestly, the safest thing you could do if you live in these states is just move to D.C. So the murder rate consistently higher in red states than blue states, but the GOP wants you to be convinced that this whole crime stuff is a Democrat problem. It's just so much easier to blame, like, vegans for obesity as you scarf an entire bucket of fried chicken in a Cracker Barrel parking lot. National Guard in D.C., Trump is talking about other cities where it needs to go, like Chicago, apparently. I'm sure New York and L.A. are on that list. He obviously already did L.A. once before. Oh my gosh, wild, wild times that we're in today. The second part of our story this evening involved the National Guard situation in D.C., how that's going to evolve, how that's going to move to other parts of the country. The third part of this week's episode, at least for main story, we're going to talk a little bit about gerrymandering. Right, I said we were talking about states, all these differences between red and blue states. Well, gerrymandering is definitely something that's a little bit different in these various states, and boy, has it been the talk of the town. Wowie. Who is gerrymandering, and why is everybody crazy about Jerry? Okay, let's take it from the top. A quick overview of Jerry's Mandarin Oranges kind of resembles an escalation in political chess. First thing that happens, the GOP strikes. Texans basically push through maps favoring Republicans mid-decade. That mid-decade piece, hold on to that in the back of your head. Next, the Democratic response. California proposes its own partisan redistricting to counter the GOP gains. This then basically leads to back and forth. Other states are now watching this very closely, and many are preparing similar strategic maneuvers or potentially legal challenges. Now, that's a very, very broad overview. I want to just give a few quick examples, and I want to explain why you, John Q. Public, give any crap about Geraldo Moncala and the mid-decade redistricting boogaloo. Here's a few examples. In Utah, there is a fight over independent commissions. So what's happening? Well, voters in Utah, essentially once upon a time, in a magical land off in the past, they basically passed a law by ballot initiative that created an independent commission that draws political maps instead of letting politicians do it. Seems like a smart thing to do, right? That way politicians shouldn't be able to rig the maps and help their own party. Now the problem, Utah's legislature later ignored that and drew maps anyway that split Democratic-leaning Salt Lake City into 4 Republican-heavy districts. So if that gave you pause, it should. The court basically said, hold the phone. Voters approved that commission. Like, you can't just override the will of the people, right? This is kind of based on the idea that voters have constitutional right to make laws directly. You know what I mean? We play a part in that, and politicians need to respect it. Or that's how it's supposed to work. So think of it this way. It's almost like the voters are hiring an independent ref for the game, and then the players, politicians, throw the ref off the field so that they can just cheat. The court ruled on this situation basically saying, no, bring that ref right back here. That's what's happening in Utah. Now, we talk about Texas. I brought up, they kind of started this whole crazy gerrymandering domino chain. Texas essentially has this fabulous history of racial gerrymandering. Oh yeah, it's not just political. It's always racial. With white people, for God's sake. So what's happening in Texas? Well, Texas drew new maps that heavily favor Republicans, even though the state is incredibly diverse. So here's the thing. Only about 40% of Texans are white. That means like 60% of Texas is non-white. I can only imagine how many white Americans just think Texas is like all white people, all angry, gun-shooting white people. I think, honestly, white Texans probably think Texas is mostly gun shooting, white loving MAGA or whatever. But here's the thing, like 60% of Texas is non-white. So under these new maps, basically, white voters now would control more than 70% of the districts. So that's nonsense, right? Talk about misrepresentation. So what's the legal argument for this? Okay, civil rights groups like the NAACP, love saying that one, they basically say that this breaks Voting Rights Act. The act basically protects against racial discrimination in voting. It should be pretty straightforward. That's the idea, of course, but it never is. So they argue that Texas packed black and Latino voters into a few districts or cracked them into many districts, making their votes less powerful. I'm sure they chose that word intentionally. But this sucks, right? Think about it this way. You've got a class where 60% of the kids want pizza, 40% want burgers, but the teacher then arranges the seats so that every table ends up with a burger majority. Pizza kids like me, born and raised in New Haven, would have their voices drowned out. And you can't drown out the pizza voices. Don't drown the pizza voices, people. The bigger picture in all of this wild rodeo malarkey is that mid-decade map redos have a schedule. Normally, states redraw maps after a new census, so that's like every 10 years. The tricky bit of this is now Republicans in some states are trying to redraw them mid-decade using the old data just to give their party extra seats. So the legal argument, well, it's unconstitutional because you're basically changing rules halfway through the game without any new information. Right? We're playing Monopoly, we're getting our butts kicked, but then suddenly hotels cost half as much, but only when you buy them. It's wild. Like, basically you just change the rules and pad the game in your favor. So let me just wrap all this up in summary and give you a bit of a package here. In Utah, courts are saying voters already said they want fair referees, and you have to respect that. In Texas, civil rights groups are saying you can't rig the map to weaken minority voters. That basically breaks civil rights laws. And then nationally, both parties are starting to redraw maps mid-game, which risks turning elections into a constant race of map manipulation. That's the other piece that I don't think long-term we're able to wrap our heads around just yet. We are dealing with some of the messiest voting times in American history. It just means that a lot of the rules and guidelines that we counted on are moot or useless or not relevant. Could be thrown out at any point in time. Okay. One more interesting political bit. Like to talk about this one just because it's always fun to see people get a little defiant. So I want to shout out Fed Governor Lisa Cook. Trump went on another one of his unhinged rants, tweets, etc., and basically said, I'm firing Fed Governor Lisa Cook effective immediately. Lisa Cook, on the other hand, basically just said, you don't have the authority. I'm not going to resign. And that was spectacular. Finally, somebody in Washington with a spine. Oh my gosh. She's got more backbone than the entire GOP caucus, who fold like a dollar store lawn chair in a Louisiana hurricane. Okay, let's bring her up on screen here for a second. I just want to call out, again, huge shout out to Lisa Cook. Trumpy boy came at you, but you said, I'm better than this. And there are not enough people standing up to this. So I get that there's a certain need to resign in specific cases. You may have heard recently a lot of the high-ranking military chiefs have resigned. It's basically in protest. And when you see high-ranking military folks resign, that's a moment for you to take pause. Oh my God, look at these ads. Corlim, if you're living with... What the heck? Oh, okay. It's Cushing syndrome. Wow. Corlim. Mifepristone. Hear from real people taking Corlim. Well, that was fun. Let me just get back to the point here. Joint Chiefs of Staff retiring. That's bad. That's really bad. That means that like the adults in the room are leaving because they know something so bad is going to happen that they cannot be associated with it. That's scary to me, and something that you should all be aware of. Someone like Elisa Cook choosing to stay to potentially gum up the works, to potentially do whatever she can to make a difference, fight for the people like us, is spectacular. I just really want to salute Lisa Cook right now. I really want to say thank you for stepping up and actually not leaving. That must have been one of the hardest decisions you've ever made, or maybe not. Maybe it was just like, there's no question in my mind, Trump can get effed, and I'm going to stick around and kick his butt in whatever way I can. To you, I salute you, a true American hero. We need more like you. Okay, next stop on the fun wagon. Today's episode is going to be a little shorter than usual. You know, sometimes I get them up near 40 minutes or so. There's just so much political happening, and there's so much happening everywhere that it's hard to find time to do anything. So this episode really is going to be focused on catching up in politics over the past 2 weeks. And then the coming weeks, we're going to get back on a weekly schedule. We're going to work on delivering episodes and keeping you more up to date, as opposed to sometimes it's every week, sometimes it's every 2 weeks. I'm going to be consistent because you all deserve it. I also need to occupy my mind and work towards some kind of goal. So I think this podcast / talk show is a great way for me to do so. I really appreciate everyone visiting and watching. For the end of today's show, I want to share at least some good news, because I do try to put good news in every single episode. For me, some of the most cathartic stuff that's happened recently has come from Governor Newsom's press office X account, which I keep calling X Twitter in my mind. It's never not going to be Twitter for me. I don't really know what to say. So because of that, I wanted to bring up and talk about Gavin Newsom's the press office account, because there are not enough people playing the same game as Trump and his cronies. However, clearly the press team working with Governor Newsom have had a breakthrough, and the past couple weeks they have been absolutely on fire. So much so to the point that Trump has actually noticeably used less all capitals in his tweets ever since Gavin and the gang have been coming at him. So I've really been enjoying this. It's been very cathartic to see someone just give him a taste of his own medicine. So here we go. We've got some of the stuff that's going on here. Like, there's tons of AI generated images that are making fun of Trump. I want to call this one out. This one made me laugh because of the fact that Kid Rock is not in the best interests of our great state. I'm giving serious consideration to taking away his residency. He's a threat to California's eardrums and should remain in the wonderful state of Michigan if they want him. God bless America. Here's another fun one, basically saying the most successful governor ever demands that Canada give him a giant plane. Chef's kiss. Oh my God. You know that Trump sees this and just his mind just catches fire. You short circuits, like eyeballs basically melting out of his eyesight. You can't. Oh my God. I wish I could just be near Trump when he sees these kinds of things happen and just see him absolutely melt down and lose his shit. So this is very satisfying to me. Again, hilarious. Like, I don't think this is real. It's clearly like an AI generated cover, because I don't think Vanity Fair would put hair gel and the art of being so handsome. Oh gosh. So anyway, I wanted to leave you all with some of the fun good news that's happening here. If you haven't had a chance and you're looking for some like fun political stuff almost every day, follow Gavin Newsom's press office account. It's not just entertainment, it's also like sort of satirically informing at the same time, which this is the first time I've kind of come across a respected political figure using this stuff so masterfully. Anyway, that's it for today's show. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next week.